From the humble biplanes made of plywood and canvas that harassed the enemy at night, to the heavily armored flying tanks that clawed the Wehrmacht apart piece by piece. This is the aerial arsenal of the Red Air Force. While the Western Allies focused on high-altitude strategic bombing, the Soviet Union built an air force for one purpose: tactical supremacy. It was a force born in the desperate fires of Operation Barbarossa, forged through massive industrial evacuation, and hardened in the skies over Stalingrad and Berlin. This fleet includes mass-produced legends, obscure prototypes, and the foreign machines that found a second life on the Eastern Front. This is the complete catalog of every major Soviet military aircraft used in World War II. Let's begin. Early fighters. Polikarpov I-15, the biplane brawler, a relic of the 1930s that was forced to fight a modern war. Highly maneuverable and armed with 4 machine guns, it could turn inside almost anything. But against the speed of the German Messerschmitts, it was hopelessly outclassed. It fought bravely in the opening days, often resorting to ramming attacks when ammunition ran dry. Polikarpov I-153, the Chaika, the Gull, the ultimate evolution of the biplane fighter. It featured retractable landing gear and a gull-wing design for better visibility. Despite being obsolete by 1941, it was flown by aces who used its incredible agility to lure faster German fighters into low-speed dogfights where the Chaika ruled. Polikarpov I-16, the Little Donkey, the Ishak, the world's first cantilever monoplane with retractable gear. In the Spanish Civil War, it was a revolution. By 1941, it was an underdog. Short, stubby, and difficult to fly, it required a master's touch. Yet, armed with 20mm cannons in later variants, it remained a dangerous opponent that bore the brunt of the initial German invasion. But the age of the biplane was over. The Soviet Union needed modern monoplanes, and they needed them fast. Enter the new generation, the Yakovlev fighters. Yakovlev Yak-1, the beauty, the foundation of the Soviet fighter force. Built with a mix of steel tubing and wood to save strategic metals, it was light and agile. It gave Soviet pilots their first real chance to fight the Bf-109 on equal terms. It was the mount of the famous female aces of the 586th Fighter Regiment. Yakovlev Yak-7, the heavy trainer, originally designed as a 2-seat trainer for the Yak-1. Frontline units realized that the rugged airframe could handle heavy weaponry and converted it back into a fighter. It lacked the agility of the Yak-1 but made up for it with durability and utility, bridging the gap to better designs. Yakovlev Yak-9, the most produced, the soldier of the sky, the most numerous Soviet fighter of the war. Improvements in duralumin availability allowed for lighter wings and more fuel. It was a versatile platform, capable of operating as a fighter, a bomber escort, or a tank buster. Yakovlev Yak-9T, the tank buster, a specialized variant of the Yak-9. The T stood for tirelessly heavy. It mounted a massive 37mm cannon in the nose, firing through the propeller hub. A single hit could disintegrate a bomber or rip open the top armor of a German tank. The recoil was so strong it slowed the plane down in midair. Yakovlev Yak-3, the victory fighter, the pinnacle of the Yakovlev line. Smaller, lighter, and cleaner than the Yak-9. It had an incredible power-to-weight ratio. Below 13,000 feet, it was arguably the best dogfighter of the entire war. The Luftwaffe actually issued a directive to their pilots: avoid combat below 5,000 meters with Yakovlev fighters lacking an oil cooler under the nose. The Lavochkin fighters. Lag-3, the varnished coffin, a grim nickname for a troubled plane. Made almost entirely of delta wood, plastic-impregnated plywood. It was heavy, underpowered, and sluggish. Pilots joked that Lag stood for Lakorovany Garantirovanny Grob, varnished guaranteed coffin. However, its fire-resistant structure saved many lives, and it laid the groundwork for greatness. Lavochkin La-5, the radial savior, the result of a desperate experiment. Engineers grafted a powerful radial engine onto the nose of a Lag-3. The result was transformative. Suddenly, the plane had the vertical performance to match the Germans. It was rugged, fast, and brutal, a true brawler. Lavochkin La-5FN, the ace maker, the definitive version, with a direct fuel injection engine and cut-down rear fuselage for better visibility. This machine dominated the skies over Kursk. It was the chosen mount of Ivan Kozadub, the top Allied ace of the war with 62 kills. Lavochkin La-7, the perfection, aerodynamically refined and heavily armed. It featured 3 20mm cannons and improved speed. It was faster than the Focke-Wulf 190 at low altitudes and could chase down almost anything the Luftwaffe sortied. By the time the La-7 arrived, air superiority belonged firmly to the Red Star. The MiG fighters, Mikoyan-Gurevich MiG-1, the high-altitude sprinter, designed for a war that never happened. It was built to intercept high-altitude bombers, performing beautifully at 20,000 feet. The problem? The war on the Eastern Front was fought on the deck. At low altitudes, it was difficult to handle and dangerous to land. Mikoyan-Gurevich MiG-3, the speed demon, an improvement on the MiG-1 with better range and armor. It was one of the fastest fighters in the world in 1941, clocking over 400 miles per hour. While it struggled as a frontline dogfighter, it found a niche in PVO, air defense units, guarding Moscow and Leningrad from high-flying reconnaissance planes. While fighters wrestled for control of the air, the Red Army needed support on the ground. They needed a flying tank, attack aircraft, Aviation Il-2, the Black Death, the Sturmovik, the most produced military aircraft in history, with over 36,000 built. It wasn't just a plane, it was a flying armored bathtub. The pilot and engine were encased in a steel shell that made it impervious to small arms fire. It rained rockets, bombs, and cannon fire on German armor columns. Stalin famously said the Red Army needed the Il-2, like air and bread. Aviation, Il-2, the streamlined beast, the successor. Arriving late in the war, it was faster and more maneuverable than the Il-2. It cleaned up the aerodynamics and added more firepower. While it saw limited action in World War II, it proved that the concept of the dedicated ground attacker was here to stay. Sukhoi Su-2, the forgotten attacker, a light bomber and reconnaissance aircraft often overshadowed by the Il-2. It fought in the chaotic early days of the war. Though it had an innovative enclosed turret and decent speed, it lacked the heavy armor required for low-level survival and was phased out by 1942. Tactical bomber, Petlyakov P-2, the Pawn, the Peshka, the Soviet equivalent of the Mosquito or Ju-88. Originally designed as a high-altitude fighter, it was converted into a dive bomber. It was fast, precise, and served on every front. Its pressurized cabin and electric systems were advanced, making it a favorite for reconnaissance missions deep behind enemy lines. Tupolev Tu-2, the late war hammer, arguably the best Soviet bomber of the war. It combined the speed of a fighter with the payload of a medium bomber. Fast, rugged, and defended by heavy machine guns, it was a nightmare for German interceptors. Production delays meant it only arrived in numbers by 1944, but it helped smash the Wehrmacht in Operation Bagration. Yakovlev Yak-2 and Yak-4, the failed scouts, light reconnaissance bombers that looked good on paper but failed in the air. They were underpowered and suffered from poor reliability. Most were destroyed on the ground or shot down early in the war. They serve as a reminder that not every Soviet design was a masterpiece. Arkhangelski AR-2, the streamlined SB, an evolution of the older SB bomber. It was sleek and capable of dive bombing, but it was complex to manufacture. It was quickly overshadowed by the PE-2, which offered better performance and versatility. Strategic and heavy bombers. Aviation Il-4, the long-range worker, the backbone of Soviet long-range aviation. It was the first Soviet plane to bomb Berlin, doing so in August 1941. A psychological blow to the Nazis. Despite difficult handling and a lack of creature comforts, it soldiered on throughout the war as a night bomber and torpedo carrier. Yermolayev Ur-2, the gull-winged carrier, designed for maximum range and payload. It featured a distinctive inverted gull wing and diesel engines in some variants for fuel efficiency. It carried massive bomb loads but suffered from reliability issues and slow speeds. It was a sledgehammer that was difficult to swing. Petlyakov P-8, the Soviet Fortress, the only four-engine heavy bomber built by the USSR in the war. It was a giant capable of carrying the massive FAB 5000 bomb. Only 93 were built. It was used for high-profile raids on Berlin and to transport diplomatic VIPs, including Molotov, to the UK and USA. It was a symbol of power, if not a mass-production success. Not all heroes carried bombs. Some carried the wounded, the supplies, and the messages that kept the front lines moving. Transport and utility. Polikarpov P2, the night witch's broomstick. The mule, a 1920s crop duster that became a legend. Made of wood and fabric, it was so slow that the stall speed of a German fighter was faster than the P2's top speed. Flown by the all-female 588th Night Bomber Regiment, the Night Witches, it idled its engine to glide silently over trenches, dropping small bombs and terrorizing exhausted German troops. Lend-Lease, the Soviet Dakota, a license-built version of the American DC-3. It was the workhorse of Soviet logistics, modified with Soviet engines and armed with a dorsal turret for defense. It hauled paratroopers, towed gliders, and evacuated thousands of wounded soldiers. Sherbakov Shesh-2, the Pike, a utilitarian light transport designed to be built in furniture factories. Powered by simple truck engines, it was slow and ugly but essential. It ferried spare parts and partisans behind enemy lines, proving that logistics wins wars. Lend-Lease legends. Bell P-39 Aerocobra, the Kabrushka, the Little Cobra. Rejected by the US and British for poor high-altitude performance, it found its true calling in the USSR. The low-altitude air war suited its engine perfectly. Soviet aces loved its heavy 37mm nose cannon and durable tricycle landing gear. Half of the top 10 Soviet aces scored the majority of their kills in P-39s. Curtiss P-40 Warhawk, the Tomahawk, received in desperate times. While considered mediocre by 1943 standards, it was rugged and reliable. Soviet pilots appreciated its ability to take a beating and stay in the air, using it effectively in the harsh conditions of the Northern Front. Hawker Hurricane, the British aid, the first Allied aircraft to arrive in the USSR. Soviet pilots found it underpowered and undergunned compared to German fighters. To fix this, Soviet mechanics often ripped out the British .303 guns and installed heavy Soviet 20mm cannons and rockets, turning it into a makeshift tank buster. Douglas 820 Havoc, the Boston, loved by Soviet crews. Fast, easy to fly, and reliable. It was used as a bomber, a night fighter, and a heavy strafer. Its tricycle landing gear made it easy to handle on rough Soviet airstrips. North American B-25 Mitchell, the reliable. Supplied in large numbers, the B-25 was used strictly as a strategic night bomber by the Soviets. Its reliability, navigation equipment, and heating systems were far superior to domestic designs, making it a prized possession for long-range guards units. Supermarine Spitfire, the high-altitude guest. The Soviets received the Mark V and later the Mark IX. While they admired its performance, it was ill-suited for the rough, muddy airfields of the Eastern Front. Its narrow landing gear caused accidents, and it was primarily used for air defense behind the lines rather than frontline dogfighting. Prototypes and interceptors. Berezhnyak-Kaiseyev BI-1, the rocket, the Soviet answer to the Me-163, a liquid-fuel rocket interceptor designed for point defense. It was incredibly fast but had a flight time of only a few minutes. The project was cancelled after a fatal crash and the realization that jet engines, not rockets, were the future. Polikarpov I-185, the Lost King, the best fighter the Soviets never built. It outperformed the Yak-1 and La-5 in almost every metric during trials. However, it required a new engine that wasn't in mass production. With the industry already strained, the decision was made to stick with existing designs. It remains one of the great what-ifs of Soviet aviation. Seaplanes and flying boats. Bereev MBR-2, the Barn, a short-range reconnaissance flying boat made of wood. It looked archaic, but it was rugged. It patrolled the Baltic and Black Seas, hunting submarines and rescuing downed pilots. Jesty, the Soviet Catalina, the consolidated PBY Catalina, built under license and supplied via Lend-Lease. Its incredible range made it invaluable for convoy escort in the freezing waters of the Arctic, keeping the lifeline to Murmansk open. Disclaimer: this video utilizes artificial intelligence for visual reconstruction. While we strive for maximum historical accuracy in our research, AI imagery can occasionally misinterpret technical details. If you spot a visual error, please let us know in the comments. Your expertise helps us improve future catalogs. From the fabric-covered biplanes of 1941 to the sleek, all-metal killers of 1945, this fleet represents the bloodiest learning curve in aviation history. The Soviet Air Force didn't win through technological superiority alone. They won through ruthless standardization, overwhelming numbers, and the sheer grit of their pilots. It was a force that ground the Luftwaffe into dust, not at 30,000 feet, but right down on the deck. Which of these Soviet machines do you think was the most critical to the war effort? Was it the mass-produced Il-2 or the Lend-Lease P-39? Let me know in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe to the channel for the next complete catalog.